Welcome to the Project Asia Bundaberg podcast, brought to you by Bundaberg Tourism. I'm Craig Shim from Alphacrane Intercultural Specialists. In this episode, our feature story on incorporating distinctively local elements into your product looks at how you can create an extra memorable experience for your Asian visitors they'll want to share with their friends. Now, the obvious benefit is word of mouth marketing for Bundaberg and for your tourism business. But there's another practical part we'll explore today, and that is how to upsell distinctively local experiences and products that Asian visitors seek during their Bundaberg holiday, and how you can maximize revenue. Later in this episode, I'll update you on some of the exciting developments that came out of our recent Project Asia Bootcamp hosted by Bundaberg Tourism. And lastly, we have a new podcast segment called What's Going On, where you get to ask questions about Asian visitors specific to your business. Today's question is by Zoe Young from Ohana Cider House and Tropical Winery, and we'll hear her question later on in the show. Currently, Bundaberg receives 10,000 Asian visitors each year. But are you seeing them in your tourism business? Possibly not. So the question is, how can we generate more revenue from lucrative Asian visitors at the destination level in Bundaberg? And how do we ensure that more Asia-ready tourism operators get a cut of the revenue? Well, to put it simply, there are three options here. The first is to attract more of these high-spending Asian visitors. That's something Bundaberg Tourism is heavily investing in with the implementation of our Asia-ready strategy for Bundaberg. Now, the second option is to get them to stay longer. That's not as easy given the travel patterns of Asian visitors. But again, Bundaberg Tourism has identified some actions that will help with this. Now, the third option is to get Asian visitors to spend more while they're here. And that's something all of us can do at the business level starting from today. That's what we'll focus on in this feature story, incorporating distinctively local elements into your product. This is all about how you can maximize revenue by delivering and upselling distinctively local experiences and products that appeal to Asian visitors. Let's start by clarifying who's our ideal visitor for Bundaberg. Now, as mentioned in episode 1, we're focused on Asian visitors who are likely to be repeat visitors to Australia. Within this criteria, our Asian market segmentation approach has two segments. The primary segment includes self-drive holiday visitors from Singapore with a minimum nightly spend of $200. And it also includes Asian visitors traveling in small groups with a minimum nightly spend of $150. This includes visitors from China, Japan, Hong Kong, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Now, let's take a deeper look into these markets from a cultural perspective to get consumer insights that might help us promote and upsell our tourism businesses. Compared with many other international visitors, Asian tourists love to shop and are more willing to pay for quality, locally produced products and distinctively local experiences, especially visually spectacular experiences they can post on social media. The spending patterns of our Asian visitors are heavily influenced by culture. Asian cultures are what we refer to as group-orientated or collectivist cultures. These cultures place a high emphasis on group harmony and relationships. So how does this relate to spending patterns? Well, Asian tourists tend to spend more money on gifts for friends and relatives than, say, visitors from individualistic cultures such as Australia, who spend more money on buying things for themselves. So this means you have the opportunity to upsell quality, locally produced products that are beautifully packaged. Remember though, these Asian visitors are probably looking to buy many gifts and also have baggage restrictions. So you should consider this in your pricing. So for example, offering discounts for buying 5 or more items, and also consider this in the size and weight of what products you're promoting to your Asian visitors. Furthermore, the Asian visitors that venture to regional destinations such as Bundaberg tend to be quite culturally adventurous. They're more willing to try locally sourced food and drinks that they don't easily have access to back at home. But because they're probably unsure of what to order, they are looking for recommendations. So for you, Take this opportunity to always sell the local story behind the product and offer personal recommendations based on their needs and wants. Also remember that it's not just what I call the sellable product that creates a memorable local experience. It's everything from your decor to the warm, friendly attitude of your staff that Asian visitors will remember. Here are some great local examples of providing distinctively local experiences I've noticed during my trips to Bundaberg that our ideal visitor would find appealing. Number 1, over at Ohana Cider House and Tropical Winery, they have a beautifully packaged fortified coffee liqueur that's made using local cold drip coffee. When it comes to food, number 2, the Windmill Cafe does a great job of featuring locally sourced food on its menu and upselling the story of local producers. Number 3, a number of accommodation places I visited have thoughtfully decorated their guest rooms with photos of local scenery, or they feature turtle-themed artwork to emphasize turtles as, of course, your local icon. And number 4, the friendly staff at the Bundaberg Rum Distillery. They are super accommodating at having their photos taken with Asian guests. Asian visitors love taking selfies with friendly locals, and the well-dressed team at Bundaberg Rum do this really well. So, to end this segment, let me ask you this question. What are 3 distinctively local elements in your business that an Asian visitor is likely to write about on a travel review website? And how can you capitalize on this to upsell your products? I'd love to hear what you come up with, and I'd be keen to feature your Asia-friendly elements on this podcast. Send them to me via email at craig@alphacrane.com.au or call Madison Clark from Bundaberg Tourism, who's coordinating all things related to Project Asia. Did you know? As Asian outbound travel continues to grow, more Asian visitors seek culturally immersive, authentic Australian holiday experiences. But what does this mean for Bundaberg? Although Bundaberg is not the only destination offering Aussie experiences, such as seeing kangaroos in the wild or diving with turtles on the Great Barrier Reef, it does boast one of the most accessible locations away from tourist hotspots. Whilst the hero experiences of Bundaberg should be central to Asian-centric messaging, it is important to supplement this with messaging about Bundaberg's 2 competitive strengths for the Asian market, and that is, number 1, the region's proximity to international gateways, and number 2, the industry's concerted effort to deliver exceptional Asia-friendly experiences. Last month, I had the pleasure of facilitating the annual Project Asia Bootcamp for Bundaberg Tourism operators seeking to increase their Asia capabilities. We workshopped ideas on implementing Asia-friendly enhancements, including number 1, overcoming language barriers using QR codes and translation function of the Chinese app WeChat. Scott Merrick from Bundaberg Rum even showed us how, at the Australian Tourism Exchange earlier this year, he incorporated a QR code into his marketing collateral to make it easier for Asian buyers to download and engage with his organization's promotional content. Number 2, during the bootcamp, we had an in-depth discussion about sharing personal recommendations for upselling what our Asian visitors are really willing to pay for in terms of experiences, retail, food, and drinks. Number 3, we talked about an initiative that Bundaberg Tourism have started to create visibility in China, a priority action from the Asia Ready Tourism strategy to start seeding Bundaberg content onto Chinese digital platforms. Number 4, a popular initiative also discussed during the bootcamp was developing standard operating procedures, and that's for rough weather cancellations to keep visitors in region during rough weather events. The idea is to create an alliance of Asia-friendly tours, attractions, and accommodation providers that can accommodate small, medium, and large groups at short notice. With a referral system in place, we're in a better position than other destinations to quickly reassign guests to Asia-friendly alternative visitor experiences when reef tours are cancelled due to weather conditions or when accommodation is at full capacity. Number 5, another discussion during the bootcamp was around culturally appropriate ways to handle the sensitive issue of rate rises with practical considerations on how to negotiate with Asian businesses. And number 6, immediately after the workshop, I discussed with the team at Bundaberg Tourism about initiating a new project to develop a digital bilingual destination map for distribution to tourism operators for use when engaging with Chinese-speaking visitors. If you'd like more information about any of these outcomes from the Project Asia Bootcamp, please contact Madison Clark from Bundaberg Tourism. Now to the segment I call What's Going On, where you get to ask questions about challenging situations regarding your Asian guests. Today's question is from Zoe Young, owner of Ohana Cider House and Tropical Winery. Here's a question.
Hi Craig, Zoe from Ohana Winery here. I'm not too sure if you can help, but since we've relocated our cellar door to Bundaberg, I'm not too sure whether our Asian guests kind of are enjoying our experience, and I'm not sure what we're doing wrong. I'm not too sure whether it's the concept that they don't really understand. So we're a little bit like a bar, a little bit like a winery cellar door, a little bit like a tour facility. But I guess it's not super clear what we are. But it seems like it translates really well to our Western guests. They seem to like it. They understand that they can come and try a few things and they can stay for a drink if they want. But it just doesn't really translate to our Asian guests. They either seem disinterested or confused, or maybe they're just not really interested in drinking wine because they might be driving. I'm not too sure if they get it. And I'm not too sure how to explain it in a way so that they do get it. Is there any advice that you can offer us?
This is an excellent case study because not only is it challenging, it also contains elements relevant to other tourism business owners. I had the opportunity to briefly discuss this with Zoe during the recent Project Asia Bootcamp, where she shared a little more information about her challenging situation. Here's what she told me. Ohana's Asian visitors tend to be part of small group tours, traveling on the same coach as other international visitors from Western Hemisphere countries. Zoe's not sure why they've chosen to be on the tour, on account that she and her partner Josh are normally very busy serving other customers at the counter, so she doesn't necessarily get to ask them, details about where they're from and what they're doing here. But she assumes that the Asian visitors are visiting Australia as part of a multi-destination itinerary. While other guests make a beehive for the bar, Ohana's Asian visitors politely seat themselves at a table and patiently wait for the tour group to move on to the next stop. The Asian visitors are generally not purchasing any drinks, and as Zoe mentioned in the sound clip, they appear disinterested and perhaps confused. So, what's going on? Well, the first step is to assess the situation. What are the cultural factors that help explain our visitors' perception of their experience? I think there are 4 key cultural factors playing out here. Firstly, perhaps these Asian visitors don't drink alcoholic beverages, although it's very difficult to generalize about this. On the one hand, there are many Asians who don't consume alcohol, or only within the context of a business function or a celebration. If a guest outwardly identifies as a Muslim, it's unlikely that they drink, for religious reasons, of course. However, on the other hand, there is a substantial drinking culture within most Asian cultures, both socially and especially at business functions and celebrations. So as I mentioned earlier, it's really difficult to generalize that Asians don't drink alcohol. Secondly, we need to ask the question, are these Asian guests our key target market for Bundaberg? Our ideal Asian visitor is an experience seeker and likely to be a repeat visitor to Australia. This is the subsegment that we want to get into Bundaberg, and these are the people that want to get under the skin of Aussie culture. Even if they're non-drinkers, they're still likely to be curious about your experience offering. And Ohana Winery certainly ticks off a number of boxes in relation to their underlying needs and wants. For example, Ohana Winery offers an authentic Australian experience with a great story to tell about how Zoe and her partner Josh transitioned their careers to set up their dream cider house and winery in Bundaberg. Furthermore, Ohana Winery produces quality, locally made products, which, as we've already mentioned in this podcast, is a big winner with Asian visitors. So I would say that the ideal visitor for Ohana Winery is the well-traveled Asian who values discovering uniquely local products or experiences and who has the spending capacity to pay for what they want. And that's exactly who we're targeting in the Asia Ready tourism strategy for Bundaberg. A classic example would be the well-heeled Singaporean millennial who appreciates good food and wine and will go out of their way to discover and try something different. So I suspect that the Asian visitors that Zoe mentioned may not necessarily be our target market. So, the third cultural factor to take into account when assessing this situation is the topic of unfamiliarity. First-time Asian visitors to Australia may not be familiar with the concept of self-service, as this is far less common in Asian hospitality compared with Western cultures. Granted, in this situation Zoe mentioned, Ohana's Asian guests would probably notice other guests from their tour group lining up for wine tasting and ordering drinks, self-service style. Nevertheless, these Asian visitors may find it confusing not to be served on arrival. And out of politeness, or more than likely fear of losing face, they may be hesitant to join the queue when they're unsure what to expect or what's expected of them. For example, what if they're expected to know all about wines before being served? That's a potentially embarrassing situation they'd probably rather avoid. Zoe also mentioned that Asian visitors may be unfamiliar with the concept of Ohana, which is part winery, part bar. This is likely to be a contributing factor and again preventing loss of face, maybe holding back Ohana's Asian guests from inquiring. It's really important to help Asian guests understand what to expect and what's expected of them, as unfamiliarity often leads to awkward situations that could result in a loss of face, or in other words, a situation they might want to avoid at all costs. Now, before we move into solution mode, there's a fourth cultural factor that may potentially be playing out in this situation, and that's language barriers. Perhaps the Asian visitors on this group tour either don't understand English or they're just not confident in conversing in English. So, these are the four cultural factors that I believe help explain what's going on. But what's equally interesting is, of course, what we can do to respond to the situation with cultural sensitivity. Keep in mind that even if Ohana's current Asian guests aren't our primary Asian target market for Bundaberg, and even if they're non-drinkers, there's no reason why you can't create an enjoyable and memorable experience for your guests and potentially make a profit at the same time. So let's talk about how we can do this. I've got a number of tips for you. Tip number 1, always welcome your Asian guests by acknowledging them immediately upon arrival. So for example, make an effort to quickly get them seated, offer them a drink, and briefly explain some key points about what they can expect. This might be as simple as explaining your self-service policy and providing a few personal recommendations about what they might enjoy purchasing. The key point is to acknowledge their arrival and not leave them to their own devices. Acknowledgement is really important in Asian hospitality. Tip number 2, give them easy access to key information that they seek. In Ohana's situation, Asian guests are arriving and seating themselves at a table. So my recommendation is to provide them with a menu of information at the table. It doesn't have to be a written menu. It may just as easily be a strategically located QR code. Now, although we don't really use QR codes much more in Australia, I cannot emphasize enough how widely QR codes are used in Asia, particularly in China. Once your Asian guest scans the QR code, which they really are highly likely to do, they'll be directed to your website, which should contain all manner of useful information for Asian guests, ranging from products for sale, interesting stories you want to tell, simple instructions on how to order, especially if it's self-service venue, and discount offers for bulk buys. And most importantly, you would also want to let them know what are the must-try products that you recommend for your Asian guests. Tip number 3. This relates to what I've just mentioned, and it's to recommend and to upsell. Your Asian guests may not know what to buy, but if you make some personal recommendations, they'll really appreciate it. The golden rule here is to build a personal rapport with your customer. Find out what their needs are, find out what their desires are, and then I'm sure, because you're familiar with your own product, you'll be able to match something that you can sell to what they are looking for. Tip number 4. Broaden your product range to suit your Asian visitors. In this case, where Zoe suspects her Asian visitors may not be consumers of alcohol, my recommendation would be to expand your product range to accommodate non-drinkers, especially as they're already visiting your business. You could sell, say, beautifully packaged food products such as locally sourced salted macadamia nuts, suitable for gifting. Or you could try creating your own blend of green teas, such as lemon myrtle green tea. Part of the guest experience would be trying your locally made teas, and of course, then they could purchase your Ohana branded packets of loose tea leaves as gifts to bring back home. So there are a few ideas for you, Zoe. Tip number 5 is to overcome language barriers. Now, we spoke at length about this during the Project Asia Bootcamp, but I'd like to re-emphasize the cost effectiveness of using QR codes to provide written information that your non-native English-speaking guests will find helpful. The other solution I'd like to mention again is using WeChat, the Chinese mobile phone app, to provide instant translations with your guests from China. And if they're not from China, Google Translate is your friend. So that brings us to the end of this segment, What's Going On? I hope you found that useful no matter what type of business you own. If you have a challenging question you'd like answered, simply make a short voice recording and send it to me as an MMS to my mobile phone, or of course you can send it to me as an email attachment. My number is 0481 387 625 and my email is craig@alphacrane.com.au. That also brings us to the end of this month's podcast. If you've got any personal insights, questions, or perhaps suggestions for future podcasts, do share them with us. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Project Asia is a 5-year program to develop Asian cultural capabilities of Bundaberg Tourism operators. Project Asia is commissioned by Bundaberg Tourism. This podcast is produced by Craig Shim from Alphacrane Intercultural Specialists. Thanks for listening.